What if Issei was son of Azazel and Ophis and become devil dragon god? Issei Hayata had been having the same dream for as long as he could remember, and it had never once made sense to him. There was no light in it. No sound, not really, not silence either, but something underneath silence, a low hum like a hell breath that never released. He stood in the center of it, or floated, he could never tell which, and everywhere he looked there was only black stretching away in every direction, folding back on itself like a snake that had swallowed its own tail so many times it had forgotten it was ever anything else. In the dream, he was never afraid. That was the strangest part. A 17-year-old boy standing in absolute nothing should have been afraid. Instead, he always felt something closer to being held, like the void recognized him. Like it had been waiting. He woke up the way he always did, with his heart perfectly calm and his sheets barely disturbed, as if his body understood something his mind didn't. "You look like hell," Matsuda said around a mouthful of bread, the three of them walking the last stretch to Ko Academy's gates. "Didn't sleep again?" "Slept fine," Issei said, which was true. He just didn't dream like normal people dreamed. "You're always weird in the mornings," Motohama added, pushing his glasses up. "Statistically, that's not normal for a growing teenage male. You should be irritable and hungry." "You're just quiet." "I'm hungry," Issei said, if only to prove he was still a person and not whatever thing his two best friends were half joking about turning him into. He grabbed a melon bread off Matsuda's bag without asking and got smacked in the shoulder for it, and the three of them laughed, and for a few minutes it was normal. It was easy. It was the kind of morning Issei liked pretending would go on forever. He didn't know yet that it was one of the last mornings that would ever be simple. Ko Academy sat under a sky the color of washed denim, students filtering in through the gates in the loose, unhurried rhythm of a school that had, over the years, developed a strange gravity of its own. Issei never thought much about why the campus felt different than it should, colder in some hallways, warmer in others, like weather patterns that belonged to a much larger place than a suburban high school. He noticed things like that sometimes. He never followed the thought anywhere. Class dragged the way Tuesdays always dragged. Issei doodled in the margins of his notebook, nothing in particular, just spirals, circles curling into circles, an old habit he never questioned. Motohama caught him doing it once and asked if he was drawing a snake eating its tail, and Issei had looked down at the page and realized, with mild surprise, that he was. "Ouroboros," Motohama said, delighted with himself for knowing the word. "Ancient symbol. Eternity, cycles, that kind of thing." "You into mythology now?" "Guess so," Issei said, and closed the notebook, and didn't think about it again until that night, when the dream came back and the void folded into itself exactly the same way. The message came after school, the way it always did, a text from a number he didn't recognize, 3 words long, "Come to the park." Alone. Issei almost deleted it. He probably should have. But there had been a girl, 2 days before, standing by the fountain near the shrine gate with dark hair and darker eyes, who had looked at him like she already knew everything about him and found it faintly, cruelly funny. She'd asked him out with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes, and something about the wrongness of that smile should have set off alarms. It hadn't. He'd said yes like an idiot, the way every boy his age said yes to a pretty girl who paid him attention. And now here he was walking toward the fountain at dusk with his hands in his pockets and a stupid, hopeful flutter in his chest that he would later be furious with himself for feeling. The park was empty in the way parks get empty right before something happens in them. The gravel path was orange with the last of the sunlight. The fountain had stopped running for the season, its basin dry and littered with a few dead leaves. Issei stood there for a long moment, checking his phone, feeling increasingly foolish, before a voice behind him made the hair on his arms stand up. "You're punctual. I appreciate that and pray." He turned. The girl, Yuma, she'd called herself, was standing 10 feet away, except she wasn't the girl anymore. Not really. Her school uniform had dissolved into something dark and strapped and barely decent, and where her shoulder blades should have been there were now 2 vast black wings, feathers like wet slate, spreading out behind her with a rustle that sounded wrong, too heavy, too much like something tearing. Issei's mouth went dry. Every instinct in his body told him to run, and every instinct in his body was, for reasons he wouldn't understand until much later that night, completely and catastrophically miscalibrated to the situation he was actually in. What? He managed. Don't take this personally, Yuma, or whatever she actually was, said, and there was something almost bored in her tone, the practiced cruelty of someone who had done this many, many times before. A spear of light condensed in her hand, crackling, throwing a hard white glow across the darkening park. You just happen to be born with something inside you my superiors want gone before it wakes up. I'm told it's nothing personal. I'm told you won't even feel it. Issei's legs wouldn't move. He would spend a long time afterward being embarrassed about that. The fact that in the single most dangerous moment of his life, his body had simply locked, frozen like a rabbit under a hawk's shadow, useless. She threw the spear. And the world did not do what it was supposed to do. Issei never saw exactly what happened. There was no flash of heroic reflex, no last-second dive, no miracle. What happened was that the air between him and the spear of light simply stopped being air. For a fraction of a second the space in front of his chest was not air, was not light, was not anything with a name. It was a perfect, featureless black. A wound cut clean through reality, the exact shape and size needed to swallow the attack whole. The spear entered that darkness, and did not come out the other side. It did not shatter. It did not fizzle. It simply ceased, the way a word stops existing the moment you forget it, and the black seam in the air closed up behind it as though it had never been there at all. For one full second, the whole park was utterly, perfectly silent. Not the silence of an empty place. The silence of a place that had briefly stopped being a place. Yuma's expression, for the first time, showed something other than contempt. It showed fear. She started, and never finished the sentence, because the same silence that had swallowed her spear reached out again, lazily, almost gently, and closed around her. She didn't scream. There wasn't time. One moment she was a fallen angel with dark wings and a face twisted in dawning terror, and the next moment there was nothing where she had been standing, no body, no feathers, no light, not even ash. The fountain basin behind her had a thin crack running through the stone where the edge of that unmaking had brushed it, a crack shaped like nothing Issei had ever seen, angles that didn't sit right in his eyes no matter how he looked at them. Issei stood there in the sudden quiet, breathing hard, staring at the empty space where a girl who might have wanted to kill him had simply stopped existing, and he understood, with the total, bone-deep certainty of someone who has just watched the floor of their life fall away beneath them, that he had done that. Somehow. Without meaning to. Without knowing how. His hands were shaking. He looked down at them like they belonged to a stranger. That was when he heard the slow, unhurried clap of a single person applauding, and turned to find a tall man in a long black coat standing at the edge of the park, backlit by the last orange light of the evening, wings the color of a raven's the only visible clue that he wasn't simply human. Well, the man said, and there was something in his voice that was trying very hard to sound casual and not quite managing it. That answers one question, at least. You're definitely mine. His name, he said, was Azazel, governor of the Grigori, leader of the fallen angels. Issei knew none of those titles meant anything to him yet, but the way the man said them, like a job description he was tired of, rather than something to be proud of, made something in Issei's chest ease, just slightly, from a scream down to a shudder. I'm not going to hurt you, Azazel said, holding his hands up, palms out, the universal gesture of a man trying very hard not to spook a wild animal. I know that's exactly what a person who was about to hurt you would say. I don't have a better argument than please believe me, so. Please believe me. You just watch me, Issei's voice cracked. He gestured at the space where Yuma had been, then at the cracked fountain, then at his own hands, as if the gesture alone could sum up the scale of what had just happened. I don't know what I just did. I do, Azazel said, and some of the forced lightness dropped out of his voice, leaving something quieter and more careful underneath. Or at least, I have a very good guess, and I've had 17 years to prepare an explanation, and somehow I still don't know how to start it. He crossed the park slowly, giving Issei space, stopping a respectful distance away and lowering himself onto the low stone rim of the fountain like a man settling in for a conversation he'd rehearsed 1,000 times and never once gotten right. Sit, he said. You're not going to like standing for this. Issei didn't sit. He also didn't run, which surprised him more than anything else that had happened so far. Some instinct, some new, alien certainty that had apparently moved into his chest sometime in the last 5 minutes, told him that whatever this man was, he wasn't the danger here. That the danger, if there was any left in this park, was standing exactly where Issei was standing. Talk, Issei said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Azazel studied him for a long moment, not with hunger, not with calculation, but with something that looked almost like grief. Like a man looking at a photograph of someone he'd lost a long time ago. You have your mother's eyes, he said finally, quietly. I used to think that was just a thing people said in stories. Turns out it's true. Turns out it's the first thing I notice every single time. My mother's dead, Issei said automatically. The story he'd grown up with, the story his human father and mother, the couple who'd raised him with dinner table normalcy and packed lunches and school festivals, had told him his whole life. A car accident before he could remember her. A woman he had a single blurry photograph of and no memories. Azazel's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's the story you were given, yeah? It's not exactly a lie. It's just not exactly the truth either. He looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars starting to prick through the deepening blue, and when he spoke again his voice had the careful cadence of a man choosing every word like it might detonate. Your mother isn't dead, Issei. She isn't human. She's not a devil, not an angel, not a fallen angel like me. She predates all of that. She predates the concept of factions entirely. There isn't really a good word for what she is in any human language, but the closest one you'd understand is, he paused, and something in his face when he said it looked almost afraid, which struck Issei as the single most unsettling thing that had happened all evening, worse even than watching a person unmake into nothing. God. Not a god. The word doesn't have a plural that fits her, just God. Ophis, Issei laughed. It came out wrong, cracked and thin, the laugh of someone whose brain had simply refused to process one more impossible thing tonight, and had defaulted to the only response left available to it. That's okay. Sure. My mom's a god. And you're, what, an angel? Fallen, Azazel said. There's a difference, and it matters more than you'd think, but we can get into faction politics some other night. Right now I need you to understand something more important. He stood, slow and deliberate, and closed the distance between them until he was close enough that Issei could see the strange, ancient tiredness behind his eyes, the look of someone who had lived so long that most things had stopped being able to surprise him, and who was, right now, in this park, being surprised anyway. What you did to that fallen angel a few minutes ago, that wasn't luck. That wasn't a fluke. That was the first time in 17 years that your real power slipped its leash, even for a second, and it killed a trained combatant so completely there wasn't enough left to bury. That's not a metaphor. There is nothing left. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Issei's stomach turned over. I didn't mean to. I know, Azazel said, and for the first time there was something almost gentle in it. That's exactly the problem. You didn't mean to, and it happened anyway, because what's inside you has been dormant your whole life, tucked away and sealed and hidden specifically so this exact scenario wouldn't happen. A scared teenage boy losing control of a power that could, if it wanted to, erase this entire town from the map without really trying. And it just woke up. Tonight. Because someone tried to kill you, and some part of you that isn't human at all decided it wasn't going to allow that. The park was fully dark now, streetlights flickering on one by one along the path, throwing long orange cones of light across the gravel. Issei realized he was still shaking, and that it had nothing to do with the cold. Who are you? He said, and it wasn't really a question anymore, more a demand, more a plea. What am I supposed to? What do I do with any of this? Azazel was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice had lost every trace of performance, every trace of the wry, tired humor he'd been using like armor since he arrived. I'm your father, he said. Azazel. Leader of the fallen. 17 years ago I did something reckless and stupid and honestly, one of maybe 3 things in my very long life I don't regret even a little. I fell in love with a being who wasn't supposed to be capable of loving anything, and she loved me back in whatever strange way she's capable of loving, and you happened. A child of a fallen angel and the Ouroboros dragon, born looking so human that even the systems built to detect divine and demonic bloodlines couldn't find you. We hid you. Both of us. Not because we were ashamed, because if the wrong people had known what you were the day you were born, there wouldn't have been a country big enough to hide you in. Devils, angels, my own people, everyone would have wanted you as a weapon, or wanted you dead so no one else could have you as a weapon. So we buried it. We buried you in an ordinary life with ordinary parents who loved you and never asked questions, and we hoped, foolishly, that if we just left it alone long enough, it would never wake up at all. He looked at the cracked fountain, at the faint, wrong-angled fracture running through the stone, and something like regret passed over his face. That plan, he said, just failed. Tonight. Publicly. In a way I genuinely don't know how to walk back. Issei stood in the dark park with the ruins of his entire understanding of his life scattered around him like broken glass, and found, underneath the fear and the confusion, and the low, persistent hum of a power he could feel now, awake and enormous and coiled just beneath his skin like something that had been asleep for exactly as long as it took to notice it was being threatened, that the question rising loudest in him wasn't why me or what now, it was, where is she? My mother. Is she, does she know? Does she know I exist, does she? She's known every day of your life, Azazel said. She doesn't experience time the way we do. I'm honestly not sure she experiences most things the way we do. But I promise you, Issei, she has never once forgotten you. She'll come. Probably sooner than either of us wants, now that this has happened. He glanced at the sky again, as if checking for something, and Issei had the distinct, uncomfortable sensation that his father, a phrase that still didn't sit right in his mouth even silently, was genuinely nervous about something for the first time since he'd arrived. When she does, she's not going to explain herself the way I just did. She doesn't work like that. Just, don't be afraid of her. Whatever she says, however strange it sounds, she is, without exaggeration, the single most powerful being that has ever existed in any world I know of, and she is also, in her own broken, alien way, the only reason you're alive at all tonight instead of a stain on that fountain. Issei looked down at his own hands again, hands that, an hour ago, had belonged to a boy who wanted nothing more complicated out of life than good grades, a girlfriend, and maybe, eventually, a job that didn't make him miserable. Hands that had just unmade a person without meaning to. I don't want this, he said quietly, and it was the truest thing he'd said all night. I know, Azazel said, and for once there was no irony in his voice at all, nothing performed, just a tired kind of honesty that Issei would come to recognize, over the weeks that followed, as the closest thing his father had to sincerity. Nobody who deserves that kind of power ever wants it. That's usually how you know they're the ones who should have it. Behind them, the streetlights buzzed. Somewhere beyond the park, Town went on with its evening the way it always did, convenience store lights, distant traffic, the ordinary hum of a world that had no idea how close it had just come to finding out what was living quietly inside one of its high school students. Issei didn't know yet about the Gremry heiress who would sense the disturbance within the hour and come looking for answers. He didn't know about Vala Lucifer, half a world away, who would feel something vast and unfamiliar ripple through the fabric of things and smile for the first time in months. He didn't know that somewhere outside the world as he understood it, in a place with no shape and no sound, something ancient and infinite and coiled like a snake around its own beginning had just felt its child's fear for the first time in 17 years, and had started, very slowly, to move. All he knew, standing in a dark park with a stranger who claimed to be his father and a fountain cracked by a power he hadn't asked for and didn't want, was that the ordinary life he'd woken up into that morning, melon bread and boring classes and 2 idiot best friends and a crush on a girl who'd turned out to want him dead, was already gone, and it wasn't coming back. Come on, Azazel said, offering a hand that Issei, after a long, hesitating moment, finally took. Let's get you somewhere safer than an open park before anyone else comes looking. You've got a lot of questions. I owe you a lot of answers. And somewhere between here and there, I imagine, your mother's going to want to meet the son she's only ever watched from very, very far away. Issei let himself be led out of the park, his shadow long and strange under the streetlights, and somewhere in the back of his mind, quiet and vast and patient, he felt it again, the void from his dreams, closer now than it had ever been, humming softly like something that had finally, after 17 years, stopped waiting. The safe house Azazel took him to wasn't a house at all, not really. From the outside it looked like an old shrine building on the wooded hill above Ko, the kind of place Issei had walked past 100 times on school trips and never once looked at twice. Weathered wood, a sagging rope of faded red and white curtain over the door, a stone lantern half swallowed by moss. Inside, the proportions were wrong in a way Issei's eyes kept sliding off of, refusing to focus on. The way a room looks wrong in a dream you're only half aware you're having. The hallway was longer than the building should have allowed. The light came from nowhere in particular. Barrier space, Azazel said, noticing him staring at the ceiling like he was trying to catch it lying to him. Folded pocket, tucked just behind the real world. Cheap trick, honestly, any decent magician can do it. Doesn't stop it from being useful. He dropped onto a cushion at a low table with the boneless ease of someone who had done this exact motion 10,000 times before, in 10,000 rooms just like it, across more centuries than Issei wanted to think about yet. Sit. Drink something. You look like you're about to fall over, and frankly, given the night you've had, you've earned it. Issei sat, because his legs had apparently decided that was the only vote they were casting for the foreseeable future. Someone, something, a small ink-black shadow that moved like a servant, and never quite resolved into a face, set a cup of tea in front of him that he didn't touch. I have about 400 questions, Issei said, staring at the steam curling off the cup, and I don't know which one to ask first. That's fair. Most people freeze up around question 200. Azazel poured his own tea unhurried, and Issei realized with a jolt of something between anger and hysterical amusement that his father, the leader of an entire faction of fallen angels, apparently, moved through catastrophe like a man mildly inconvenienced by traffic. Try the easy ones first. Save the ones that'll make you cry for later, when you've got somewhere private to do it. Are my parents, the ones who raised me, do they know? Something flickered across Azazel's face, there and gone. No, he said. And that's not a small mercy, before you get angry about it. They love you exactly as much as they think they do. That's not a lie I told them. It's real. I made sure of that, before you were placed with them. I wanted you raised by people who'd actually love a son, not people paid to babysit a bomb. They don't know what you are because knowing would have put targets on all 3 of your backs, and because, frankly, there was never going to be a version of that conversation that didn't end in them either not believing it or believing it, and never sleeping again. That's not your call to make, Issei said, quieter than he meant to, more raw. No, Azazel agreed, without flinching from it. It wasn't. I made it anyway, because the alternative was worse, and I've had 17 years to decide whether I'd make the same choice again. And the answer keeps coming back yes, and I still don't love that answer. Welcome to parenthood, I suppose. Even the absent, catastrophically complicated kind. Issei wrapped both hands around the teacup, more for something to hold on to than any interest in drinking it. The girl. Yuma. Rainer, whatever her name actually was. You said she was fallen? Like you? One of mine, yes. Not one I sent, Azazel added quickly, before the accusation could fully form on Issei's face. I run the Grigori, but I don't run every fallen angel like pieces on a board, much as certain factions within my own organization would prefer I did. Someone gave that order. I intend to find out who, and I intend for the conversation that follows to be memorable. His voice didn't change register when he said it, no dramatic flare of menace, and somehow that made it worse, the flat, administrative calm of a man who had just quietly promised violence the way other people promised a follow-up email. For what it's worth, I don't think she came here with orders to seduce a schoolboy for fun. Someone in my ranks found out, or suspected, what you might be, and decided the safest move was to end you before you woke up. They weren't entirely wrong to be afraid. They were catastrophically wrong about the solution. She's dead, Issei said. The words tasted strange in his mouth, too small for the size of what they meant. I killed her. I didn't do anything. I didn't move. It just happened. That's the part one need you to actually hear, and not just let wash over you in shock, Azazel said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping the last of its irony entirely. What lives in you isn't a power in the way devils have power, or fallen angels have power, or even the heavenly dragons have power. Drake and Albion, the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon, you'll meet the stories eventually. Their strength you channel, strength you grow into, strength that answers to training and willpower and time. What your mother isn't strength like that. It's absence. It's the negative space underneath all of existence, the nothing that was there before there was a something to be somewhere. She is, as close as any language gets to describing it, the concept of non-existence given enough shape to have a name. And you, he said, and something that might have been fear, might have been awe, moved behind his eyes, carry a piece of that. Not metaphorically. Not spiritually. Actually, when you're frightened enough, or threatened enough, that piece stops being dormant and starts being real, and reality, in a very small localized area, simply stops being able to argue with it. Issei sat with that for a long moment, the tea going cold in his hands, the strange folded room humming very faintly around him with a silence that no longer felt neutral now that he knew what silence like that could mean. So I'm dangerous, he said finally. You're the most dangerous thing in this hemisphere, Azazel said, without a trace of exaggeration in his voice, which was somehow worse than if he'd been joking. Right now, tonight, an unconscious 17-year-old boy who doesn't know how to use his own hands yet is more dangerous than every Satan and Seraph and Cadre leader put together, because none of them can do what you just did by accident. That's not a compliment, before you take it as one. That's a warning label. You are, at this exact moment, a loaded weapon nobody, including you, knows how to safety. The shadow servant refilled his cup without being asked. Issei watched it move, mostly because looking at anything else felt like too much right now. You said my mother's coming, he said eventually. I said she'll come, Azazel corrected. There's a difference between Ophis deciding to do something and Ophis's schedule matching up with anyone else's expectations of when she experiences causality. More like, he made a vague, circular gesture with one hand, a suggestion, then a rule. She might be here in an hour. She might already be here and simply hasn't decided to be perceived yet. I've genuinely stopped trying to predict her, and I've known her for the better part of 2,000 years. Issei's stomach did something complicated at that. What's she like? Azazel was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Issei thought he might not answer at all, and when he finally spoke his voice had gone somewhere Issei hadn't heard it go yet, not performed, not careful, just genuinely, nakedly uncertain. A tone that didn't seem to fit a man who otherwise seemed to have an answer prepared for every possible version of every possible question. She's not like anything, he said. That's the honest answer, and I know it's not a useful one. She doesn't laugh the way you or I laugh. She doesn't get bored the way you or I get bored, except, she does, actually, that part's real, that's more or less the whole reason any of this happened in the first place. She got bored. Bored of watching the factions fight the same war over the same 12 reasons for the last several thousand years. Bored of a universe that kept insisting on being loud and complicated when all she'd ever wanted, in her own strange, patient way, was quiet. I was, he laughed, short and a little disbelieving of himself, the least likely person in any of the three factions to end up matching to something like her. A fallen angel who talks too much, who's more interested in cataloging sacred gears than starting wars, who somehow, against every possible statistical likelihood, made an infinite void God curious enough to keep coming back. He looked at Issei then, and something in his face was almost pleading. I'm not going to promise you she'll act like a mother the way you'd want one to. I don't think she experiences wanting the way we do, or love, exactly, but she came back, Issei. Over and over, for 17 years, to watch you from a distance she thought was safe. That's not nothing. From something that is, technically, capable of not caring about anything at all, that's not nothing. Before Issei could find words for the enormous, aching, complicated thing that answer put in his chest, the room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound. It was the same silence from the park. The same silence from his dreams. It didn't arrive so much as it simply became true, all at once, the way a light switch makes a room lit rather than the light traveling to fill it. 1 second the folded shrine space held the ordinary hush of two people talking quietly, and the next second that hush deepened into something with weight, something with presence, Something that made the shadow servant flatten itself against the wall, and the flame in the single lantern gutter down to almost nothing. Azazel was on his feet immediately, and Issei registered with a distant kind of shock that his father, a being Issei had, in the last hour, come to understand was staggeringly powerful in his own right, had gone very, very still. The particular stillness of someone in the presence of something they respected far more than they'd ever admit out loud. Ophis, Azazel said, and his voice, for the first time all night, wasn't performing anything at all. She was simply there. Issei never saw her arrive, never caught a flicker of movement, or a flash of light, or any of the things his exhausted brain had been braced for. One heartbeat the corner of the room by the low table was empty, and the next heartbeat there was a girl standing there. She looked like a girl, Issei's age or younger, small and slight, with long black hair that seemed to swallow the dim light around it rather than reflect it, wearing a plain Gothic dress the color of the inside of his dreams. Her eyes were the same black within black he'd seen in the mirror his entire life without understanding why, without a pupil or an iris that his mind could find a clean edge for, like looking into a hole in the world rather than at a face. She didn't move like a person breathing, didn't shift her weight, didn't do any of the thousand tiny unconscious motions that told a human brain this is alive, this is safe, this follows the same rules I do. She simply stood, existing in the space the way a fact exists, undeniable and absolute, and looked at Issei with an expression he couldn't read at all, not cold, not warm, something that predated the entire concept of expression and was only wearing one now because it understood, distantly, that it might be expected to. Issei, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost soft, and it landed in the room the way a stone drops into still water, a small sound that somehow displaced everything around it. You are frightened. It wasn't a question. Issei found he couldn't lie to it, couldn't even really consider lying to it, the way you can't lie to weather. Yeah, he said, voice thin. Little bit. Something crossed her face that might, on anyone else, have been the ghost of a smile, there and gone in less than a second, so fleeting Issei half wondered if he'd imagined it. I remember being frightened, she said. Once. It is not a pleasant thing to remember. I am sorry you carry it now. You remember being frightened, Issei repeated, because it was the strangest sentence anyone had said to him yet, in a night absolutely packed with strange sentences. Of what? Ophis tilted her head, very slightly, an alien little motion, like something calibrating itself to a question it hadn't expected. Of ending, she said simply. Long ago. Before there was very much to end. I do not experience it the same way now. I do not think I experience very much the same way now, except when I look at you. Azazel, standing off to the side, made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't come out so raw. That's about as close to sentiment as you'll ever get out of her, he said to Issei, quiet, almost gentle. Take it. It's rarer than you know. Ophis's black eyes moved to him, unhurried, and something passed between the two of them that Issei couldn't parse. Some private language built over centuries that didn't need words, or maybe didn't have any. Then she looked back at Issei, and took one step closer, and another, until she was standing near enough that he could feel it, not warmth, not the ordinary presence of a body nearby, but a kind of pressure at the edge of his awareness, like standing at the lip of somewhere very deep and hearing, faintly, an echo that never quite finished coming back. You unmade someone tonight, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was, as far as Issei could tell, simple fact, stated the way someone might note the weather. I didn't mean to, Issei said, and hated how small his voice sounded saying it, hated that he was 17 years old apologizing to something that might genuinely be older than the concept of apology. I know, Ophis said. You would not have. Not yet. It is early. She studied him for a long moment, that black, bottomless gaze moving over his face like she was reading something written in a language only she could see. You are afraid of what you are. I understand this. I was, a pause, the smallest hesitation, like the thought itself was unfamiliar territory even for her, uncomfortable, once, in a shape I did not choose. It changes. It does not disappear. But it changes. What am I? Issei asked, and it came out cracked, desperate, the question underneath every other question he'd asked all night. He said, Azazel said you're a god. He said I'm part of that. I don't feel like a god. I felt like I killed someone. I feel like a murderer. Something in Ophis's expression shifted then, not softened, exactly, that wasn't the right word for anything about her, but focused, the way a person's whole attention narrows onto something that matters more than everything around it. You are not a murderer, she said, and for the first time there was something almost sharp in her voice, something with an edge to it that hadn't been there before. A murderer chooses. You did not choose. What woke in you tonight is not a crime. It is a nature. There is a difference, and it is the only difference that has ever mattered to me in the whole of a very long existence. She tilted her head again, studying him. I did not make you to kill. I made you, and here, for the first time, she stopped entirely, the sentence simply ending, unfinished, as if even she didn't fully know how to complete it, or wasn't ready yet for him to hear the rest. Azazel's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and quick, some old tension surfacing in his shoulders. Ophis, he said low, a warning of some kind Issei didn't understand yet. Not tonight, she agreed, and the strange half-finished sentence closed like a door, leaving Issei staring at the space where an answer should have been. Tonight he only needs to know that he is not what he fears. That is enough for tonight. That's not enough, Issei said, and surprised himself with how much force came out with it, some thin thread of his old, ordinary stubbornness reasserting itself in the middle of all this impossible new terror. You made me, she made me, he made me, for something. Both of you. I heard it in the way you just talked about it. I want to know what. Ophis looked at him for a long moment, unreadable, and Issei had the strange sensation of being weighed by something that didn't experience time the way scales usually did, a judgment that could have taken a second or a century and felt, from the inside, exactly the same either way. You will know, she said finally. Not tonight. You are not ready to hear it tonight, and I am not. Another of those strange pauses, a god searching for a human enough word. I am not ready to say it tonight. It is not a small thing. It deserves to be said properly, and properly requires more than the first hour after your entire life became a different shape than you thought it was. She reached out then, slow, deliberate, the first genuinely careful motion Issei had seen from her, and rested one small, cool hand against the side of his face, barely a touch at all, more suggestion than contact. For now. You are frightened, and you are angry, and you are exhausted, and all three of those are correct responses to tonight. Rest. The rest will still be here tomorrow. I promise you that much, if nothing else. I am very good at things staying exactly where they are until they are needed. It should have sounded cold. Coming from anyone else, delivered in that flat, alien cadence, it would have sounded like a dismissal, like being handled. Instead, something about the absolute stillness underneath it, the total absence of performance, of manipulation, of any of the small human dishonesties Issei had grown up learning to detect and brace against, made it land differently. Made it, against every rational instinct he had left, feel almost safe. Okay, he heard himself say, quiet, and some enormous tension he hadn't realized he was holding in his chest let go, just slightly, just enough to breathe around. Ophis's hand withdrew. She looked at him a moment longer, that unreadable black gaze, and then said, so quietly Issei almost missed it entirely, you have my eyes. I did not expect that to matter to me. It matters to me. And then, exactly as she had arrived, she was simply gone. No flash, no sound, no displacement of air, just an absence where a presence had been a heartbeat before. The room's ordinary hush rushing back in to fill the space she'd occupied like water closing over a stone. For a long moment neither Issei nor Azazel said anything at all. The lantern flame steadied itself, climbing back to its normal small brightness. The shadow servant peeled itself off the wall, and resumed its quiet motion around the room as if nothing at all had happened. Well, Azazel said eventually, dropping back onto his cushion with a long exhale that sounded like it had been held for several minutes. That went better than I expected, honestly. She didn't disintegrate any furniture. Personal record. Is she always like that? Issei asked, staring at the empty space where his mother, the words still didn't fit right, still felt borrowed from someone else's life, had been standing. More or less, Azazel said. Though I'll be honest, that was more expressive than I've seen her in years. Decades, maybe? You should feel, I don't know if flattered is the word. Significant. You should feel significant. She doesn't reach for people, Issei. People reach for her, and mostly she lets them, the way a mountain lets people climb it. Tonight she reached first. Issei sat with that for a long time, turning it over, feeling the ghost pressure of her hands still faintly against his cheek, cold and strange and, underneath the strangeness, somehow careful. She said she made me for something, he said finally. She wouldn't say what. No, Azazel agreed, and something guarded moved behind his eyes again, some old caution reasserting itself. She wouldn't tell me either, for what it's worth, not the whole of it, not until she decided the time was right, and her sense of right operates on a timescale that makes geology look impatient. I have theories. I've had 17 years to build theories. I'm not going to hand them to you tonight, half-formed, on top of everything else you've had to swallow in the last 3 hours. You've earned better than my guesswork. That's not fair, Issei said, though without much heat behind it. He was too tired, too hollowed out by the sheer volume of impossible things to have real anger left for it. No, Azazel agreed again, quiet. It's not. Very little about tonight has been fair to you, and I'm sorry for the parts of that which are my fault, which is most of them. But I'll tell you the one thing I am sure of, the one thing I've been sure of since before you were born. He met Issei's eyes, and for once there was nothing performed in it at all, just a father, however strange and belated the role, looking at his son. Whatever she made you for, whatever purpose she had in mind when she decided, against every one of her own nature, to want something as complicated and breakable as a child, that purpose doesn't own you. You heard her say it herself, near enough. She didn't choose the shape you take, and you don't have to choose the purpose she imagined for you either. You're allowed to be more complicated than a reason for existing. Every child is. Even the ones whose parents happen to be gods. Outside the folded walls of the little shrine, somewhere out past the boundary of the barrier, Ko Town's ordinary night went on, the last trains rattling home, street lights holding their small circles of orange against the dark, a world of humans and devils and angels alike who had no idea that a fallen angel's failed assassination attempt had just cracked open a secret two factions and a primordial god had spent 17 years trying to keep sealed. Issei didn't sleep that night, not really. He lay on the futon the shadow servant provided, staring up at a ceiling that was subtly, uncomfortably wrong, and thought about a cold hand against his cheek, and a voice saying "You have my eyes," and the terrible, aching shape of a sentence that had stopped itself before it could finish. "I made you." He didn't know yet what came after that dash. He suspected, somewhere in the deepest, most honest part of himself, that he wasn't going to like the answer when he finally heard it. But for the first time since the park, since the spear of light and the silence that had swallowed a girl whole, he found he wasn't quite as afraid of finding out. Issei woke up on the futon in the folded shrine space with the distinct, disorienting sense that his body had rested even though his mind hadn't. Sunlight, or something doing a very convincing impression of sunlight, filtered through paper screens that shouldn't have existed on the inside of a building shaped like this, and for one merciful half-second before memory caught up with him, he thought he might have dreamed the entire previous night. Then he saw his own hands, resting on top of the blanket, and remembered exactly what they'd done to a fountain, and to a girl who'd once smiled at him like he mattered. "You're up," Azazel said from the doorway, holding 2 cups of something that steamed. He looked, infuriatingly, exactly as put together as he had the night before. No sign at all that he'd sat up half the night explaining the collapse of his son's entire worldview. "Good. We've got a lot of ground to cover and a limited amount of time before the Gremry girl works up the nerve to come knocking, which, going by the look of the barrier readings this morning, is going to be soon. She's persistent. I respect that in a devil." "The Gremry girl," Issei repeated, sitting up, dragging both hands down his face. "Rias Gremry. The president of the Occult Research Club. She's a devil? Heiress to one of the 72 pillars of the underworld, technically," Azazel said, dropping down across from him and setting the cups on the low table between them. "Also happens to run the local territory, which makes her, functionally, the reason nothing supernatural happens in this town without her noticing eventually. She noticed last night. I'd be more worried if she hadn't." Issei took the cup, mostly because it gave his hands something to do besides shake. "Is she dangerous?" "Everyone's dangerous. That's rather the whole theme of your life from here forward," Azazel said, not unkindly. But no, not to you, not really. Not in the way you mean. She's ambitious and she's protective of her people, and she just watched something happen in her territory that she can't explain, which is going to make her anxious, and anxious devils with power tend to overcorrect. Mostly what we need to worry about isn't her doing something reckless. It's her reporting what she saw up the chain, to people considerably less patient than she is. He took a slow sip of his own drink. Which is a conversation for later today. Right now, before anyone else gets a say in what happens to you, I want to actually explain what you are. Properly. You deserve better than what I managed last night. Issei set the cup down, all the exhaustion of the night before crystallizing into something sharper, attention focus, the particular stillness of someone bracing for information they suspected would matter for the rest of their life. Okay, he said. Explain it. Azazel didn't launch into it immediately. He seemed, for the first time since Issei had met him, to be organizing his thoughts rather than performing a version of them, choosing in order, weighing where to start, the careful deliberateness of a teacher who understood that the sequence of a lesson mattered as much as its content. There are, broadly, 3 kinds of power in the world you're waking up into, he said finally. Devil power, drawn from demonic energy, the kind that runs the underworld and fuels the evil peace system the Gremry girl uses to build her peerage. Angelic power, drawn from light and divinity, the kind Michael's seraphs wield. And fallen power, my kind, which is angelic power that's been through something, corrupted or transformed depending on who you ask and how charitable they're feeling that day. All 3 of those systems have rules. Hierarchies. Limits, even at the top. A Satan is powerful, but a Satan is powerful within a framework, bound by the rules of the framework that makes them a Satan in the first place. He set his cup down and met Issei's eyes. What your mother is doesn't have a framework. That's the entire point of her. Ophis predates the concept of factions, predates the concept of gods having hierarchies, predates, as far as anyone's ever been able to determine, and plenty of very old, very learned people have tried, predates the dimension you're currently sitting in. She's frequently called the strongest being in existence, and even that undersells it, because strongest implies she's competing on the same axis as everyone else, just further along it. She isn't. She's off the axis entirely. The rest of us measure power in terms of how much force we can bring to bear. Ophis's version of power is closer to authorship. The void isn't a weapon she uses, it's the truth she is, and things that touch that truth stop being able to argue that they exist. Issei thought of the spear of light entering the black seam in the air and simply not coming back out, and felt something cold settle low in his stomach. And I have that, he said. Not a question. You have a piece of that, Azazel corrected, gently but precisely, like a man laying down the exact terms of a contract he needed his son to understand fully before signing. Not all of it. I don't think all of it is even a concept that applies to something infinite, and thank every remaining shred of my faith for that mercy, because a 17-year-old with the complete, unfiltered authority of Ophis would probably end several dimensions by lunchtime without meaning to. What you have is a seed of it, dormant your whole life, the way I engineered it to be, sealed under enough layers of suppression that even I wasn't entirely sure it would ever wake at all. It woke last night because you were about to die, and something underneath the human parts of you decided that wasn't going to be allowed to happen. And the other half, Issei said slowly, working through it out loud. The you half. What does that add? Something almost like pride flickered across Azazel's face, quickly suppressed but not quite fast enough to hide. Fallen angel power isn't gentle, but it's comprehensible, at least. Light corrupted into something with more edges, more violence, more willingness to be used as a blade instead of a shield. On its own, it would have made you strong. Strong enough to matter, strong enough that I'd have been quietly proud of you regardless of your mother's half of the equation. But layered on top of what she gave you, it does something I genuinely don't have a full model for yet. It gives her void shape. Direction. Ophis's power in its purest form doesn't discriminate, doesn't aim, doesn't build, it just erases, indiscriminate as gravity. My blood in you gives that erasure something closer to intent, a void with a will behind it instead of just an absence spreading outward. That's not a small distinction. That's the difference between a natural disaster and a god. The words sat heavy in the small room. Issei turned his cup slowly in his hands, watching the surface of the tea ripple, and thought about a fountain cracked at angles his eyes refused to parse, about a girl who had smiled at him, and then simply ceased. I don't want to be a god, he said quietly. I just want to know how to not do that again. By accident. To someone who maybe didn't deserve it. That, Azazel said, is exactly the right thing to want, and it's the entire reason we're having this conversation instead of me handing you a sword and telling you to go be terrifying at people. Control comes first. Everything else, meaning, purpose, whatever your mother's got half-planned in that unknowable head of hers, comes after you're not a danger to a bus stop full of strangers every time you get startled. He stood, offering a hand down to pull Issei to his feet, and for a moment, just a moment, the gesture felt almost normal. Almost like the kind of thing an actual father did with an actual son on an actual, ordinary morning. Come on, Azazel said. Let's go break some of my furniture instead of a fountain in a public park. I've got wards up. Feel free to be as much of a disaster as you need to be. The training ground, once Azazel dropped the last layer of concealment around it, turned out to be a wide clearing deep in barrier space, ringed by trees that swayed slightly in a wind Issei was fairly sure wasn't real, under a sky that held a sun in roughly the correct position but no clouds at all, ever, as if someone had painted the backdrop once and never bothered updating it. First thing, Azazel said, rolling his sleeves up with the brisk efficiency of a man who had done this exact lesson with exactly one other student a very long time ago, and remembered every mistake he made, teaching it. Forget everything you think you know about summoning power. You're not going to grit your teeth and push and have a wave of energy explode out of you like the anime you've definitely watched. What woke up in that park wasn't summoned. It was released, a reflex, not a decision. Our whole job today is turning that reflex into a decision. Give me your hand. Issei held it out, and Azazel wrapped his own hand around it, closing his eyes, and Issei felt something pass between them, not power exactly. More like a question being asked directly of whatever lived underneath his skin. There, Azazel murmured, eyes still closed. I can feel the seal. It's not gone, before you get any ideas, it's cracked, not shattered, which is honestly the best possible outcome given what happened last night. If it had shattered completely you'd currently be a small localized singularity, and I'd be having a very different, much sadder conversation with your mother. He opened his eyes. What I want you to do is find the crack. Not force it wider, find it, and get familiar with the edges of it, the way you'd get familiar with a doorway before you decided whether or not to walk through it. How do I do that? Close your eyes, Azazel said. Stop trying so hard to be a person for a second. You've spent 17 years building a very convincing human shell around something that isn't human at all, and honestly, that's a credit to whoever raised you. You're a remarkably normal kid for someone who's secretly the son of the primordial void. But right now I need you to let a little of that shell down. Think about the dream. You've had it your whole life, haven't you? The dark. The quiet that isn't really quiet. Issei's breath caught. How did you? Every version of this that's ever existed has the dream, Azazel said, quiet, almost gentle. It's not a nightmare. It's memory. Not yours, hers. Some thin thread of connection that's been running between you since before you were born, letting a little of what she is bleed through into your sleep because a fully sealed connection was never actually possible, not with someone like her. Stop treating it like something frightening for a second, go toward it instead of away from it. Issei closed his eyes. It felt absurd, standing in a fake clearing under a fake sky, being told to think his way into a memory that belonged to his mother. And yet the moment he actually let himself stop resisting it, stop bracing against the dream the way he had every single night of his life, something in his chest simply opened, easy as breathing. The dark rushed in, immediate and total and for the first time, not frightening at all. He felt it then, the crack Azazel had described, not as an image but as a sensation, a seam running through the center of himself where two enormous things had been forced to overlap into a shape small enough to be human. On one side, something that burned, sharp-edged and restless, hungry in the particular way fire is hungry. On the other, something so still and so vast that still barely began to describe it, not empty, he realized, with a jolt of understanding that felt like it belonged to someone much older than him. Not empty, patient. The stillness of something that had never once needed to hurry, because it had always, in every possible sense, already arrived. There, Azazel's voice said, distant, like it was reaching him through water. You feel that? Don't grab either side. Don't try to pull power out of it like a lever. Just sit in the middle of it. Get used to being both things at once without either one swallowing the other. Issei sat in the middle of it. However long that took, he couldn't have said. Time didn't seem to move the same way inside that dark, and slowly, carefully, felt the seam stop feeling like a wound and start feeling like something closer to a spine. A place where two things met and, instead of destroying each other, held. When he opened his eyes, Azazel was watching him with an expression Issei hadn't seen on him yet, something unguarded, something that looked almost like being moved to tears and refusing, out of decades of practiced composure, to actually let it happen. How long was that? Issei asked. 4 hours, Azazel said. Give or take. You've got a longer attention span for meditative disaster prevention than I expected, which, again, credit to your human parents, because that is not a trait either of your actual parents possess in any measurable quantity. Issei looked down at his hands. They didn't look any different. He didn't feel any different, not exactly, but there was something new sitting quietly at the center of him now, something he could feel the edges of instead of just feeling it as a vague, formless dread. Not tamed. Not even close to tamed. But acknowledged, for the first time, on something closer to his own terms. That's day one, Azazel said, clapping him once on the shoulder, brisk and warm and, for a moment, entirely unpretentious about how proud he was. It gets harder from here, and slower, and there's going to be a stretch in the middle where you're convinced you're not improving at all even though you are, because that's how literally everyone experiences training something like this. But that, he nodded at Issei, at the new, careful stillness he was visibly carrying differently than he had that morning, that's real progress. Faster than I made, honestly, and I had a considerable head start on you in terms of raw comprehension of what any of this even was. Is that a compliment? Issei asked, and was surprised to hear something almost like humor in his own voice. It's data, Azazel said deadpan, which from me is the same thing. They were 3/4 of the way back through the folded woods toward the shrine when the air ahead of them shifted, not the gentle, absolute stillness of Ophis's arrivals, but something faster, sharper, a compression of space that popped audibly like a held breath released all at once. A young man stepped out of the tear in the air like he was stepping through an ordinary doorway, silver hair, mismatched eyes, one blue, one violet-white and faintly luminous, marked with a symbol that looked disturbingly like a dragon's eye, and an expression of open, hungry delight that made every hair on the back of Issei's neck stand up before the stranger had said a single word. Governor, the young man said, not taking his eyes off Issei for even a second, you could have told me you were hiding something interesting. Valley, Azazel said, and there was an edge of genuine irritation under the familiarity, the tone of a man dealing with a student who had never once, in the entire span of their acquaintance, respected a closed door. This is a private lesson. And how, exactly, did you find this space? I put up wards specifically so casual visitors. Wards keep out casual visitors, Vala said, finally dragging his attention off Issei long enough to give Azazel a thin, sharp smile. I felt something last night. Something that moved through the world like the whole world briefly forgot how to keep existing in one specific spot, and then it stopped. And I spent the rest of the night trying to figure out where it had come from, because I have never, in my entire life, felt anything remotely like it, and I've fought gods, Governor. I've fought things that don't have names in any language humans use. He looked back at Issei, and the hunger in his expression sharpened into something almost reverent. And now I find it standing in your training grounds looking like an ordinary high school student. That's not a coincidence I'm inclined to walk away from. Issei took an involuntary half-step back. Whatever this was, whoever this was, the sheer density of power radiating off him was unmistakable even to Issei's barely week-old awareness of what power was, supposed to feel like, an intensity that sat several full categories above anything he'd felt from Azazel, sharp and cold and coiled like a predator that had simply decided, for the moment, not to move. Issei, Azazel said, with the weary tone of a man performing an introduction he'd rather not be making, this is Vala Lucifer. White Dragon Emperor. Wielder of the Divine Dividing. Former student of mine, and, depending on the week, either my proudest achievement or my greatest professional regret. Valley, my son? Something in Vala's expression flickered at that last word, surprise, quickly folded away and replaced with something colder and more calculating, the look of a man rapidly recalculating a very large equation. Your son, Vala repeated slowly. The governor of the Grigori's son. Which would make his mother. He stopped himself, and for the first time since he'd arrived, something that might have been genuine caution entered his expression. No, he said, quieter. You didn't. I did, Azazel said, flat, daring him to make it a problem. Vala looked at Issei again, really looked this time, not with the hungry, appraising stare he'd arrived with, but something more careful, almost wary, the look of a fighter recalculating not just an opponent's strength but the entire category they belonged to. Ophis, Vala said, very quietly, like the name itself required a kind of respect he didn't extend to much of anything. You're Ophis's son. Issei started, and found he didn't actually know how to finish that sentence yet, 24 hours into knowing it himself. He's still finding his footing, Azazel said, stepping slightly, deliberately, between them, not aggressive, but final, the posture of a man closing a conversation before it went somewhere he wasn't ready to let it go. Which is precisely why I'd appreciate you not turning this into whatever you're already turning it into in that head of yours. Vala's mismatched eyes stayed on Issei for a long moment, unreadable, and then, unexpectedly, he smiled, not the sharp, hungry smile from before, but something quieter, almost sincere. I'm not here to fight you, he said. Not today, anyway. You're clearly not ready, and honestly, killing you before you're interesting would be a waste I'd regret for the rest of my life. He said it so matter-of-factly that Issei couldn't quite tell if it was meant as a threat or, in whatever strange currency this man dealt in, something closer to a compliment. But I want you to understand something, Issei Hayato, because nobody else is going to say it to you as plainly as I will. I have spent my entire life chasing a fight worth having, a wall I can't get past by trying harder, only by becoming something more than I currently am. Every white dragon emperor is born chasing that, whether we know it or not. It's woven into what the divine dividing is, an endless hunger to divide, to take, to grow past every limit anyone hands us. I have met precisely one being in this world who might actually be that wall. He glanced briefly, meaningfully, toward Azazel. Until yesterday, I assumed it would be Great Red, if I ever got strong enough to find him. Now I'm not sure. Now there's a very real chance the wall I've been looking for my whole life is standing in front of me wearing a high school uniform and looking terrified of his own hands. I don't want to be anyone's wall, Issei said, and there was more heat in it than he expected, something of last night's raw fear still close enough to the surface to sharpen into anger. I don't want to be a weapon, or a rival, or a wall, or whatever else everyone keeps deciding I am before I've even figured it out myself. Vala's smile didn't fade, but something behind it shifted, respect maybe, or the closest thing a man built entirely around the concept of surpassing limits could manage towards someone actively refusing to be defined by one. Good, he said, surprising Issei completely. Hold on to that. Every strong thing I've ever met that let other people decide what it was for ended up being used until there was nothing left worth calling itself anymore. Decide for yourself what you're going to be. Just, and here the hunger flickered back, bright and undisguised, when you finally do decide, and you're strong enough that the decision actually means something, come find me. I intend to be there when it happens. One way or another. He stepped back, the air behind him already tearing open again into the same compressed doorway he'd arrived through, and paused half inside it, looking back at Azazel with something almost fond underneath the sharpness. You should have told me sooner, Governor, he said. This is, without question, the single most interesting thing that's happened to any of us in a decade. And then he was gone, the tear in the air sealing shut behind him with a sound like a held breath finally released. Issei stood in the sudden quiet of the clearing, heart still hammering, and looked over at Azazel, who was rubbing his temple with the particular exhaustion of a man who loved someone he also, quite reasonably, wanted to strangle on a semi-regular basis. That, Azazel said, was Vala Lucifer being restrained, for the record. You should see him when he's actually trying to provoke someone. He called me a wall, Issei said, still a little dazed. That's the nicest thing he's called anyone in years, Azazel said. Come on. One dragon emperor down. I'd like to get you home, well, get you somewhere, before the Gremry girl finishes working up her nerve, because I have a strong suspicion she's about to be problem number 2 of the day, and I would genuinely like at least one problem today to stay solved before the next one arrives. Behind them, the fake sun sat exactly where it had been all day, and somewhere far past the edges of the folded clearing, in a town that still had no idea what had woken up inside one of its ordinary high school students. Rias Gremry was already walking toward a shrine on a hill she had somehow never noticed before, drawn there by a disturbance in her territory she could not yet explain, and did not yet know she wasn't remotely prepared for. Rias Gremry had walked past the wooded hill above Co Academy more times than she could count without ever once registering the shrine sitting on top of it, and that fact alone told her almost everything she needed to know about what she was walking toward. A concealment this good isn't cheap magic, Aquino said beside her, sandals crunching softly on the gravel path, her usual easy smile pulled thin at the edges into something more watchful. Whoever built it wanted more than privacy. They wanted this place to not exist at all unless you already knew to look for it. I know, Rias said. She kept her pace even, unhurried, the deliberate calm she trained into herself since she was young enough to understand that a Gremry's composure was itself a kind of weapon. Underneath it, though, something had been sitting wrong in her chest since the previous evening, a ripple through the territory's ambient magic so total and so brief that for one full second, every familiar spirit and low-level ward she maintained across Co had simply gone silent, as if the entire town had held its breath. Whatever did that last night wasn't devil magic. It wasn't angelic, and it wasn't quite fallen either, though there was something of that flavor threaded through it. I've never felt anything like it. Not once, not in any archive, not in any story my brother ever told me. You think it's dangerous? I think, Rias said, slowing as the shrine's weathered gate came into view at the top of the path, that if it wanted this town gone, this town would already be gone. That's not comforting. That's the opposite of comforting. But it means whatever we're about to meet made a choice not to, and I'd like to understand why before anyone decides that choice needs revisiting. They reached the gate. The red and white curtain over the door stirred faintly in a wind that didn't touch anything else nearby, and standing beneath it, arms crossed, entirely unsurprised by their arrival, was a tall man with raven-black wings and an expression that managed to be both welcoming and profoundly unamused at the same time. Governor Azazel, Rias said, and felt Aquino stiffen slightly beside her. Either of them had expected the leader of the Grigori himself waiting on the other side of that gate, in what was nominally Gremry territory, looking for all the world like a man who'd been expecting company for tea. Rias Gremry, Azazel said, inclining his head with just enough courtesy to be correct, and just enough dryness to make clear he wasn't remotely intimidated by the title behind her name. You're punctual. I appreciate that in a devil who's about to ask me questions I don't especially want to answer. Then you already know why I'm here. I have a guess, Azazel said. Something disturbed your territory last night severely enough that you felt it from the school, and you'd like to know what, and whether it's likely to disturb it again, and whether you need to escalate this up your family's chain of command before it becomes a problem larger than either of us wants it to be. Clothes, Rias admitted, unsettled by how precisely he'd laid it out. You're not denying there's something to find. No, Azazel said. I'm not. Come in. This conversation deserves better than being had standing in a doorway, and frankly, I'd rather you hear the true version from me than assemble a wrong one from rumors and residual magic readings. The wrong version tends to end with people panicking, and panic is exactly what I'm trying to avoid this week. Issei was sitting at the low table when they entered, and the look on his face when he saw Rias walk in, pale, caught, visibly bracing for something, told her more in a single second than an hour of careful questioning might have. Issei? She said, startled out of her composure for the first time since arriving. She knew him, distantly, a second year, unremarkable by every measure the school kept, the kind of ordinary boy she noted in passing the way she noted most students, without any particular reason to look closer. Nothing about him had ever registered as anything but human. Is he the one He's the one, Azazel confirmed, settling onto his cushion with the weary patience of a man about to repeat an explanation he'd already given once and wasn't looking forward to giving again. Sit, please, both of you. This is going to take a while, and I'd rather you hear it sitting down, he told her. Not everything, Issei noticed, with a flicker of something between relief and unease, that Azazel skated carefully around the exact nature of Ophis's unfinished sentence from the night before, around whatever purpose still sat unspoken between his parents, but enough. Enough that by the time he finished, Rias's face had gone through disbelief, then alarm, then a kind of careful, calculating stillness that Issei was beginning to recognize as the universal expression of powerful people recalculating exactly how much danger they were sitting in a room with. Ophis, Aquino repeated quietly, when Azazel had finished. Her usual playful composure had entirely deserted her. The Ouroboros dragon, the being three factions have spent decades either hunting or avoiding, depending on how suicidal the season's leadership happens to be feeling. You're telling us she has a son. Sitting in our school, in our club technically, since he's been attending our meetings for. He hasn't been attending your meetings because of anything to do with this, Azazel cut in, mild but firm. He's been attending because he's a teenage boy who wanted to be part of a club with pretty girls in it, same as any of you would expect from any other ordinary student. That part of him was never a lie. It's still not a lie. He's still exactly the boy you thought he was yesterday morning. He's also, as of last night, considerably more than that. Both things are true. I'd ask you to hold both of them at once, because he's going to need people around him who can. Rias was quiet for a long moment, her sharp blue-green eyes moving from Azazel to Issei and back, weighing something Issei couldn't fully read. What do you want from me? She asked finally. You didn't bring us here just to explain. You want something. Sharp, Azazel said, with something like approval. Yes. I want two things, and I'll be honest about both. First, discretion. What you've learned today doesn't leave this room, doesn't reach your brother's ears, doesn't reach Sona Citri's, doesn't reach anyone outside the three of us plus whoever Issei chooses to tell himself, until he's had time to actually become something closer to stable. The instant this gets out, and it will get out eventually, that's simply reality. Every faction with an opinion on the balance of power is going to want either a piece of him, or his head, and I would very much like him to have some say in which of those conversations happens first, instead of having it forced on him, while he still can't fully control what happens when he's frightened. And the second thing? Azazel's gaze slid toward Issei, and something in it softened, became less negotiation and more request. Let him stay near you, not as a peerage member. I know that's the obvious offer, and I'm asking you not to make it, not yet, maybe not ever. He doesn't need to belong to anyone right now. What he needs is to keep having an ordinary life alongside the extraordinary one that just landed on him, and your club, your people, are the closest thing to safety and normalcy this town has to offer someone who's just found out what he is. I'm not asking you to protect him. I don't think he needs protecting, not in the conventional sense. God help whoever tries to hurt him now and doesn't know what they're dealing with. I'm asking you to let him keep being a person around you, instead of only ever being a threat assessment. Rias looked at Issei for a long moment, really looked, the way she hadn't in the 2 years he'd been a background presence in her school, and something in her expression shifted, softened at the edges without losing any of its underlying wariness. Is that what you want? She asked him directly, cutting past Azazel entirely, the question aimed at Issei himself for the first time since she'd walked in. Not what your father wants for you. What you want? Issei blinked, caught off guard by being asked at all. The entire conversation so far had moved around him like weather, powerful people negotiating terms above his head, and this was the first moment anyone had actually stopped to ask what he thought about any of it. I want to still go to school, he said slowly, working it out loud as he said it. I want to still be able to talk to Matsuda and Motohama about stupid stuff and not have every conversation be about void gods and dragon emperors and fallen angel assassination attempts. I don't know what I am yet. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this, but I know I don't want to lose the parts of my life that were mine before last night, just because it turns out there's more to me than I thought. He met her eyes, steadier than he felt. So yeah, I want to keep coming to the club. If you'll still have me. Knowing all this now, something in Rias's expression settled, decision made. You're still the same idiot who fell asleep in the clubroom reading manga last week, she said, not unkindly. Whatever else you are, that part didn't change overnight, and honestly, that matters more to me right now than any of the rest of it. She turned back to Azazel, composure fully restored, the negotiating posture of a Gremry heiress settling back into place. I'll agree to your terms. Discretion, and he stays welcome in the club, exactly as before. But I want something in return. Of course you do, Azazel said, almost fond. Name it. If something happens in my territory because of him, an attack, a consequence, anything that puts my students or my peerage at risk, I want to be told immediately. Not after, not once you've decided I'm ready to hear it. Immediately. This is my ground, Governor. I won't have secrets living on it that I only learn about when they've already caught fire. Azazel considered her for a long moment, and something that looked almost like respect crossed his face. Fair, he said. Agreed. The walk back to the school grounds afterward was quiet, Aquino hanging back a few steps to give Rias and Issei space, though Issei could feel her watching him with an appraising, curious attention that hadn't fully resolved itself yet into anything as simple as trust. You should have told me you were scared, Rias said eventually, not looking at him, her eyes fixed ahead on the path. Last night. In there. You looked like you were bracing to be told you weren't allowed to be a person anymore. Wasn't sure I was, Issei admitted. Still not entirely sure. You are, Rias said, with the flat, unhesitating certainty of someone used to being listened to. I've been running this territory for 2 years. I've met devils who forgot how to be people the day they got their pieces, and fallen angels who never had the chance to learn in the first place, and I can tell you, without any doubt, that whatever you're carrying now, you're still standing in it like a person and not like a weapon. That matters. Hold on to it as hard as you can, because from what Azazel described, there are going to be a lot of people in the next few weeks who'd very much like you to forget it. Issei looked at her, surprised by the sudden warmth underneath her usual composed authority. Thanks, he said, and meant it more than the single word could really carry. Don't thank me yet, Rias said, a faint, wry smile finally breaking through. You're about to walk back into that clubroom and explain to Kiba and Kaneko why you smell like you've spent all day in fallen angel barrier space, and I promise you, that conversation is going to be far more awkward than anything Azazel put you through this morning. Word moved faster than any of them had planned for. Sona Citri found out within 2 days, not from Rias, who kept her word precisely, but from the simple mathematics of a student council president whose job was noticing anomalies, and Issei Hayate's sudden, unexplained absences followed by his equally sudden reappearance radiating an aura she couldn't place had been exactly the kind of anomaly Sona built her entire operating philosophy around catching. I'm not going to pretend I don't know something's different about him, Sona said, arms crossed, standing in Rias's clubroom with the particular controlled irritation of someone who valued information and hated being denied it. I respect that you're keeping whatever agreement you made. I don't respect being left in the dark about something living in my school that could, apparently, do whatever it is he did to that fountain in the park. It's not my secret to hand out, Sona, Rias said, steady, unmoved by the pressure. You know I'd tell you if I thought it was safe to. It isn't. Not yet. And if it becomes a problem for my students, then it becomes my problem first, Rias said, because it's my territory, and I gave my word it would stay that way. If that changes, you'll be the second person I tell, right after Azazel himself. That's the best I can offer you right now. Sona held her gaze for a long moment, weighing the offer, and finally, reluctantly, nodded, not satisfied, but willing, for now, to let the tension sit unresolved rather than force a fracture between the two households that governed the town. Fine, she said. But Rias, whatever's under that boy's normal face, if it decides my students are collateral damage in whatever's coming, I won't be nearly as patient the second time. Understood, Rias said, and meant it. Issei felt the shift in the weeks that followed, subtle but undeniable. The way certain students in the halls seemed to go quiet when he passed, not with fear exactly, more a kind of unconscious deference that people extend to things they can't name, but instinctively register as different. The way Kaneko's cat-sharp senses tracked him a beat longer than they used to whenever he entered a room. The way Kiba, ever polite, ever careful, started sparring with him during club training with a new, deliberate caution in his movements that hadn't been there before. He hated it, a little. He'd wanted, more than anything, to keep the parts of his life that felt normal, and normal, it turned out, wasn't something you could simply decide to keep once people around you knew what you were capable of. But there were good parts too, unexpected ones. Rias started including him in club strategy sessions not as a curiosity to be managed but as someone whose perspective mattered, whose growing understanding of a kind of power none of them fully comprehended made him useful in ways none of the devils in the room could match. Aquino, once her wariness settled into something closer to genuine curiosity, took to teasing him with the same easy, needling affection she gave everyone else in the club, a small, deliberate act of normalcy that Issei appreciated more than she probably realized. Even Kaneko, sparing with words as always, started sitting a little closer to him during their study sessions, an unspoken vote of confidence from someone who trusted almost no one easily. Matsuda and Motohama noticed something had changed. Of course they did. They'd known him since childhood. But they noticed it the way friends notice a person going through something they don't have the full picture of, worrying in their clumsy, well-meaning way, asking if he was okay, covering for him when he zoned out in class from exhaustion after another dawn training session with his father. Issei let them worry without telling them why, and hated the lie by omission every single day, and didn't see, yet, any way around it that didn't put them in more danger than the lie already did. It gets easier, Azazel told him one evening, watching him stare out over the practice clearing after a long session, the fake sun sinking toward a fake horizon in its same fixed, unchanging arc. Not the power. That never really gets easier, not completely. You'll be managing that the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be, which for you, incidentally, is going to be considerably longer than you're currently imagining. I mean this part. Learning to carry two lives inside one body. It stops feeling like a wound eventually, starts feeling more like just how you are. I promise you that. How long did it take you? Issei asked. Azazel considered the question with more honesty than Issei expected. I'm not sure I'm finished yet, he admitted. 2,000 years, give or take, and I still catch myself some nights wondering which parts of me are really mine and which parts are just roles I've been playing so long I forgot the difference. That's not meant to discourage you. It's meant as fair warning, and also, I suppose, as company. You're not doing this alone, whatever else is true. That's worth something, I think. I've had to believe it's worth something, most days. Somewhere out past the folded edge of the clearing, in the ordinary world, Co-Academy's evening classes let out into an unremarkable autumn dusk, students filing home none the wiser that their town's fragile new balance, devil territory, fallen angel secrets, and a boy who was quietly becoming something the old maps had no name for, was already, deep in the Grigori's own ranks, about to come under threat from someone who had never once believed that balance was worth preserving in the first place.